lives in silence.
We are following some breaking news near Reagan National Airport. A small plane has gone down into the Potomac River.
The name spoken out loud.
Brielle, she's really talented. Franco, he really wanted to go to the Olympics.
In the birthdays marked and missed. In a community that gathers and remembers.
They were my inspiration.
Is it the shock of that first moment, even 1 year later? Is it grief, measured in days that don't feel the same? Or is it love, so persistent it refuses to leave? That night marked a date. It split time.
Personnel have responded and are out there right now helping crews.
Into before and after.
We should be angry because for years no one listened.
1 year later, we move forward. But how do we remember? How do we honor a community? How do we hold on to love, asking us all not to forget? In the next 30 minutes, we return to the runway, back to the river, inside the NTSB investigation, and to the families still living with the aftermath.
It's been 1 year since that deadly mid-air disaster over the Potomac. American Airlines Flight 5342 was just about to land at Reagan National Airport when it collided with a Blackhawk Army helicopter. 67 people lost their lives. There were no survivors. The shock of this tragedy has transformed into a call to action. How do we make sure something like this never happens again? Thank you for joining us. I'm Leslie Foster. Our entire team responded within minutes of the collision. We've been tracking every development since, talking with families still living with this loss, checking in with first responders who worked through the horror and the cold, and holding agency leaders accountable for safety changes that should have been made long ago. Before we get into what's happening now, let's take you back to the night Washington stopped and the first moments of a tragedy still echoing 1 year later. We are following some breaking news near Reagan National Airport. A 60-person aircraft has gone down into the Potomac River. Sadly, there was some sort of mid-air collision with a helicopter.
Fire departments and police departments from across the region are executing a rescue operation.
We've seen now several families make their way down to this area where they're getting information from the airline about the fate of their loved ones.
About 4 to 5 boats have come through here. 18 bodies have been recovered. The U.S. Figure Skating Organization saying that they had skating community members on that American Airlines Flight 5342.
We are going to leave no stone unturned in this investigation.
We are now at a point where we are switching from a rescue operation to a recovery operation.
60 passengers and 4 crew members were on the plane, including athletes and coaches of U.S. Figure Skating.
We have seen all day people heading inside the Ashburn Ice House, where I'm told many of the victims trained and skated, parents, skaters, both that knew the victims in this crash.
He really wanted to go to the Olympics, but now he can't go.
Fire and EMS Chief Donnelly was saying earlier about how right now they're going to focus on recovering the helicopter, because we do know that 26 people still need to be recovered.
2 days after the mid-air tragedy, and we are learning now the names of the victims.
She was so excited to tell me about her being a law professor at Howard University in the fall. And she said, I just couldn't wait for me and Mom to tell you.
Such an outstanding student, outstanding young lady.
Johnson is being remembered as the life of the party. He was one of the 7 Maryland friends who was coming back from a group trip.
We are seeing memorials popping up around the DMV honoring the 67 lives we lost Wednesday night. These crosses that you're looking at right now have been placed at Gravelly Point to honor some of those victims. This is the same area where first responders have been collecting debris from that collision.
You feel for them because you identify with them. We identify with them and their families.
I didn't know anybody there on the flight, but it's just a tragedy.
And its victims won't soon be forgotten.
On the one-year anniversary of this tragedy, the families of the 67 people killed in the crash were invited back to Reagan National Airport. We kept our cameras away to give them privacy. But those families gathered at the airport for a memorial ceremony, and then those who wanted to were brought by boat to the crash site. Virginia Congressman Don Beyer and Alexandria Mayor Aaliyah Gaskins announced plans to build a permanent memorial, a bench with a plaque sitting in Alexandria's Rivergate City Park on the banks of the Potomac River. In her memorial statement, Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger commended Congressman Beyer, along with Senators Mark Warner and Tim Kaine, for their commitment to safety changes at Reagan National. The lawmakers were staunchly against plans to add more flights to DCA long before the crash. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser echoed her sentiments, praising the first responders and urging leaders to adopt new safety recommendations from the NTSB. As of now, President Trump has not made a statement about the anniversary of this collision. The night before the anniversary of the crash, families and local leaders gathered at Constitution Hall in Northwest D.C. It was a night of reflection on the lives we lost and recognition of the first responders who raced into the unknown.
Let love carry you.
Losing your child before you is unbelievable, and he was such a caring, kind person. Like people have said, this was an accident waiting to happen. I mean, because there's been so many issues around DCA over the years with near misses and stuff, but tragically it happened to be our family.
Obviously it's sadness, but it's anger. This should never have happened. I can't figure out why this happened, how this wasn't prevented, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm angry. I'm pissed.
While we were powerless in that moment to help our loved ones, we were not powerless to help each other. So that's what we did. And we've been doing that ever since.
When the initial response ended, you kept coming back, searching, working, and ensuring that every one of our loved ones was ultimately returned home to us. That commitment means more to our families than words can express.
Before we continue, it's important to understand what makes Reagan National different from other airports in the U.S. It only has 2 runways, and they are the busiest in the nation. And so between the restricted airspace because of the White House and the military zones, a former pilot tells us it is a tight squeeze to take off and land safely.
When you look at the restricted areas around there, I don't know of any place more restricted than that. But as long as you know that, you fly in, you land, you do your business, and then you turn around and you fly out and you fly the river and you stay off the, the restricted areas.
So those busy runways are now even busier. Despite protests from leaders in Maryland and Virginia, Congress approved the addition of 5 nonstop round-trip flights to DCA. It was part of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024. Those extra flights started just weeks after the collision, but helicopter flights are now permanently banned near the airport. The FAA believes the new restrictions address any potential risks of a future collision. And those aren't the only changes made since the collision. I want to bring in WUSA 9 Chief Investigative Reporter Eric Flack. I know you were able to go straight to the experts investigating this.
Yeah, we had to go straight to the top to find out exactly what was going on, with some safety measures scaled back and new warnings from investigators about what's at stake. I talked with Jennifer Homendy. She's the chair of the National Transportation Safety Board. Now, here's a part of our conversation.
Immediately after the collision, safety measures were finally put into place, measures that should have been there before.
Are those safety recommendations in place now, and what were they?
Well, fortunately, the Secretary acted on those recommendations within a couple of hours of us issuing them, which was separate the traffic, don't allow that mix of traffic. I think what is astonishing to me is when we issued our urgent safety recommendations, it's us who said, okay, we have a helicopter route with a max of 200 feet for altitude for that helicopter. We have a civilian aircraft that's coming into runway 33. We looked at the glide slope, which brings them into runway 33, and discovered that 75 feet max separates that helicopter and that aircraft. That's max. Nowhere in the national airspace would that be acceptable. It took us to look at it after a terrible tragedy, to point it out to the very organization that is responsible for ensuring it's doing the reviews, the annual reviews of those routes to make sure they're safe.
It's also an unthinkable dismissal of our investigation and of 67 families who lost loved ones in a tragedy that was entirely preventable.
Boy, those words, they really hit you, because Jennifer Homendy is serious about what she's saying here.
Can you imagine if you had a family member on that flight and you have the chair of the NTSB saying this was entirely preventable?
And you were there listening to her as she said that. I know that families have been pushing for some new legislation after this crash.
Yeah, it's called the Rotor Act, and the bill would require all aircraft, civilian and military, to broadcast their location in real time. The Army Blackhawk in this crash was not transmitting its position, so air traffic controllers and the passenger plane had no way of knowing where it was in the sky. Now, if both aircraft had been electronically visible to each other and to tower control, controllers would have been able to keep them separated. Instead, they were relying on pilots to do what's called see and avoid each other at night. That is literally where they're using their eyes in the sky to just stay away from each other. Families say this technology could prevent another tragedy, and they are frustrated that it has not already become law.
Yeah, so what's the holdup? Where does it stand?
Well, there's a lot of talk about this week. The bill has passed the Senate unanimously in December, but it has stalled in the House over the all-frustrating cost concerns. Families in D.C. this week say they are continuing to push to make sure this does in fact become law.
Pushing for the law and pushing through their pain.
And pushing through their pain
to make this happen.
So that other families don't have that same pain.
Absolutely. All right, Eric, we'll be talking a little bit later. And of course, we want to remember some of the youngest lives lost in the crash. Figure skaters from the Ashburn Ice House. They were just moments away from arriving home. They had gone to a skating camp in Kansas. And our John Duran shows us how the local skating community is making sure their memories live on.
Coaches and skaters here at the Ashburn Ice House say this past year, when they've taken the ice, they've thought about those that lost their lives a year ago, and those skaters who can't take the ice anymore.
Should we spin? Spin?
Carrying heavy hearts, these young figure skaters press on.
I want them to remember how beautiful, all the skaters were. They were so good at skating, and they were just really sweet people.
11-year-old Alexis Winch and 12-year-old Claire Bang spent hours on the ice with a handful of the 67 souls lost in last year's mid-air collision over the Potomac River.
I was in total shock that day. I didn't believe, they woke me up that morning, they were like, oh, you lost some friends last night. I didn't believe them until I saw it on the TV.
The loss stunned those that skated side by side with the victims and those who spent years teaching them the sport.
I really miss them. I wish they were here, but I feel like every day we're out here, we're celebrating what they did.
We coach all this, like Franco and Everly and Alidia and Brielle. We know these people for years and years. That's why it's very hard loss for us.
Here and at the MedStar Capitals Iceplex, where these skaters spent so much of their time, this piece of artwork will carry on their memory.
The sculpture has two skaters, both reaching to be the best they could be.
They were skaters with Olympic aspirations, just like Winch and Bang, who have even more motivation to reach the world's biggest stage.
I want to win gold for them. I want to skate the best for them. I want to do like anything that they couldn't reach to like do it for them, so they'll know, oh, like she did it for us.
In Ashburn, John Duran, WUSA 9.
And you talked to the father who lost his wife and an ice skater about, you know, just what it's been like a year later.
Yeah, and they all said that it's really been so much more painful than even they would have imagined. And to just think about losing your child who has this huge, bright potential, but then also to lose your wife, lose your whole family as part of this tragic crash. You know, and we both have our parents. We're lucky enough to be parents. Yeah. And we think about the potential of our own children, and we both think that I know that the sky's the limit.
You do. You don't think that their life will be cut short on a plane coming back from where they are doing the thing that makes them the happiest, right?
And they are excelling.
Yeah.
They are excelling.
And I think that's why it's so important to continue to tell these stories.
Absolutely.
So people don't just think of a plane that went down. You think of the 67 lives who meant so much to the people in their lives and around them.
Real quick, I talked to another family member. She's the mother of Mikey Waldorf from Maryland.
Okay.
Mikey Stovall, excuse me, from Waldorf, Maryland. He was the hunter.
He was on the trip with his friends, right?
Hunting trip. And that's Christina Stovall, and she told me this week that she didn't want to do interviews at first, but she was scared that of the 64 people who died on American Airlines Flight 5342, 67 total with the crash, but 53 on the flight, that she didn't want Mikey Stovall to be remembered as seat number 5A, that he was more than just a seat on that plane. And that is when she decided to start speaking out and to go public so she could keep his memory alive. And I get the feeling from talking to a lot of these families, many of them have been open with the media and with us journalists, that they all feel the same way, that it is devastating what has happened to them. But they want to make sure that their loved ones are remembered for the special, incredible people that they were.
So glad they shared those stories with all of us. So it's important that we also recognize the dozens of first responders who raced into those icy waters that night in the Potomac River to help any way they could. Our Simone D'Alba brings us the story of the rescue and the recovery told through the eyes of those who answered an unimaginable call for help.
A little over 2 miles from Reagan National Airport, you'll find Fire Station 204 in Alexandria, Virginia.
That evening we had pot roast for dinner and we were just kind of like settling in for the night.
For Fire Captain Nathan Kraus and his crew,
I was working on some paperwork.
What was largely an unremarkable routine evening changed with a single call.
We heard a report of the plane crash and it was, you know, all hands on deck.
They didn't know what exactly they were running toward. They just knew they had a job to do.
It is Alexandria's only fireboat.
Into the black of night.
So when we came up to DC, this was where the helicopter was at.
And onto the icy waters of the Potomac.
We were quite literally and figuratively in the dark.
And all of a sudden we smelled it. We were like, that is jet fuel.
The crew immediately saw debris. Sensory overload. The smell of jet fuel overpowering.
I thought we were looking for maybe a couple people, if anything, but I didn't realize we were looking for 60 plus. So that was that's kind of when reality hits you pretty quick. So that's pretty horrifying.
The sober reality setting in, saving lives became their sole focus.
What do you remember the most? We were standing on the front of this boat with flashlights, and we were looking for survivors, victims.
It makes it a little more personal when you start seeing, you know, ice skates in the water and suitcases and victims and wedding rings.
For many of the first responders, this rescue and recovery mission was personal.
I grew up in Annandale.
These first responders were trying to save members of their own community.
I don't know that you could ever really be prepared for what we saw that night. Just not knowing what to expect was coming at us, and kind of processing that in the moment as well as afterwards is something that I'm still trying to figure out.
Long after the sirens fade, long after the wreckage has cleared, the emotional toll remains.
We're out to change people's lives and make saves, but we couldn't that night, so that's what made it difficult.
They lean into their work and on each other.
A month later, we're still talking to each other, making sure we're good.
For Captain Krause and the entire crew, the path through their own grief is always second to their calling. And so we leave you with this. From Fireboat 201, some of the faces, names, and stories behind one of the biggest rescue operations in DC history.
And aren't we grateful to have had them here on that night to try and provide some measure of comfort to families? There was a story that I know we've done here where one of the first responders said, we wanted family members to know that their loved ones were not alone. That just
takes your breath away.
It just got me.
Yeah, it takes your breath away. Do you know, and I know you do know, how many of those first responders worked in the days after the crash, after it became a recovery instead of a rescue? That they looked for the personal items, the mementos of the family members, to make sure that those were pulled out of the wreckage so the families could ultimately get back, have something to hold on to. You know, the victims' families have felt very, very passionate about remembering the first responders and honoring them. They were, of course, honored at the memorial service last night. At the NTSB hearing earlier this week, the majority of the families that were there were all dressed in unified black T-shirts, and on the front they honored the victims, and on the back, as many of the first responders as they could fit on the back of that T-shirt. I mean, I think there were like 80 some when you add them all up. And so, you know, they certainly acknowledge, and it was January, of course, it was cold.
Freezing.
It was
those waters were very, very cold.
And the weight of the moment, what they were doing, and the discomfort, the physical, the emotional discomfort. I mean, it's not what the families went through, but it was a lot.
It was a lot, and it's clear that they carry that with them today. This experience has left a mark on them that they carry as well. So we know that leaders are actively working on some safety changes, but a lot of people, Eric, they tell you this, I hear it too, they feel pretty uneasy about flying in or out of DCA or even at all.
And when I talked to the chair of the NTSB, Jennifer Hamandi, I brought this up because it really is the question on everybody's mind. I put the question to her. Do you feel safe flying with your family out of Reagan National Airport? She gave me that answer. She also said that we will only see real change if everyone agrees to act. People generally have an anxiety about flying. What would you say to them about safety concerns flying with their family out of DCA?
I would say aviation is incredibly safe. I'm not concerned when I get on a plane. Within a month of the mid-air collision, I got on the same type of plane, same airline with my daughter so she could visit a college over a weekend. It is safe. Is it 100% safe all the time? No. There are risks in everything we do, and there's risks in a very complex system. And that's why we exist, to point out those risks and to tell others This is what you need to fix so somebody never has to experience the loss that 67 families experienced on January 29th.
You said the FAA transferred out tower personnel instead of taking ownership. Those were, I believe, your words. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Normally, after a accident or a near miss or something else, that's the first thing we see is let's just transfer out tower personnel. That's not the fix. It might be part of the fix. Systemic organizational change. Organizational change that needs to occur at FAA, specifically in the air traffic organization, and change that needs to occur in the Army. And that needs to be taken very seriously. Why do we have to keep saying the same things over and over again? Why does it take more death and more death for anyone to take us seriously?
And if people don't take these recommendations seriously, does that mean the American public is at risk?
Yes. I mean, first of all, let me answer it this way. Aviation is incredibly safe. I am not worried about getting on a plane. I'm more worried about being on the road, getting to and from the airport. That's where people die in overwhelming numbers. 112 people hourly in the United States die on our nation's roads. With that said, safety change doesn't occur until you implement those recommendations. When we issue a recommendation, it is focused on what would prevent the same thing from occurring. And if you don't heed our warnings, then the same thing is going to occur later.
In the days following the crash, President Trump blamed diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives among the air traffic control for the crash. It's a claim that was made without any evidence. In reality, there's been a notable shortage of air traffic controllers for about a decade. We've reported on this.
We've talked about it.
Right? Despite changes to the hiring and the training process. So, Flack, what really went wrong in that control tower, according to the NTSB?
And one thing we have to acknowledge, and the NTSB laid it bare, is that things did go wrong in that control tower. Investigators say controllers were overwhelmed and relying too heavily on that see and avoid technique. It's something that they say is just not as reliable as traditional safety techniques. The night of the crash, a single controller was managing on the radio 2 different frequencies, at least 12 aircraft at once, 7 airplanes and 5 helicopters. He told investigators after the fact he felt overwhelmed. But here's the problem. Supervisors aren't trained to proactively watch for that. Controllers are taught to ask for help, but there's no system for supervisors to recognize when somebody is in over their head, as they clearly were that night.
Even though there were other people around them at the time.
There were. We know that controller actually has a second of sorts. That second, we know from the NTSB investigation, was writing down some sort of helicopter data instead of being a second set of eyes. There was a supervisor in that control tower that also had their attention somewhere else. And they had that one controller who was in charge of trying to communicate warnings that were also going off in that control tower, audible warnings that people apparently weren't really listening to, paying attention to, and those warnings just never got passed on to the pilots of the 2 different.
And that one person trying to do air traffic control for a dozen flights. So what is the NTSB recommending?
Well, the NTSB has issued 48 safety recommendations, and most are aimed at the FAA, who they were very critical of. The NTSB wants better training for controllers so they can better recognize threats before they become disasters. They want time limits on how long people can work in the tower without a break. The NTSB also says the FAA needs to reclassify, this was a big deal, Reagan National Airport as a more complex facility so it can attract more experienced controllers. Reagan National used to be a 10. They downgraded it at some point to becoming a 9. There is people who believe it never should have been downgraded because of its complexity. But why the number matters is the pay scale and experience level is based on what level of complexity you're at, and you can't recruit and retain the most talented air traffic controllers, because that's not at the top of the food chain, as it were, for air traffic control jobs around the country. So they want that bumped back up to a 10 to be able to continue to retain the best of the best, which we clearly need.
You certainly want the people who know the most in those very key positions in the air. All right, Eric, your reporting has just been so phenomenal on this. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to comprehend a tragedy like this. Many of us are feeling powerless at how to respond. And so we turn to the family of American Airlines flight attendant Ian Epstein. You may remember those viral videos of him singing to his passengers. His family says the way he lived is an example we can all follow.
One thing about our dad was that he really wanted to make an impact on everybody that he met. He really liked meeting other people, and I think he looked at life from a lens that not a lot of people look at it from, and that he was so empathetic to people. And I think we forget that sometimes, is that we have to share those experiences together, because if we don't, then we're standing by every tragedy looking at it from a distance, and nothing's ever going to change. You have the ability to have a big impact, even in a small way, to other people.
The one thing I can tell you, and the solace that it brings us, and it should bring some solace to the other family members, that he had them laughing. We know he had them laughing. So he was meant to be on that flight for that purpose, to make their last moments in this world happy ones. Yeah, it's hard to even say that, but we know it's true at the same time.
1 year later, the search for answers continues, but for the families, the love and the loss are permanent. And so as we remember the people behind the headlines, we also remember how this community showed up for our neighbors in the wake of this tragedy. We'll continue tracking the investigation and any safety changes at Reagan National. You can find our extended interviews and our full timeline right now on our free WUSA 9 app and on WUSA9.com. For all of us here at WUSA 9, thank you for watching.